Hi.
I'm recording now, so my name is Nick Messersmith. We have Phil and Emil here, and tonight's special guest is Mary. And
Yes.
Mary, do you go by your full name, Isabel Sales, or do you just like Mary Sales?
I like Mary, and it's Salas. It's actually a Spanish
Salas.
pronunciation of
Okay.
the last name.
Awesome.
Colonization.
Solace. Okay.
Salas.
I feel that.
Yeah.
So our special guest then today is Mary Solace. So Mary, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So I'm gonna let Phil and Emil, they have some questions, and we may have some questions based on what you say and everything else, and we'll kind of go from there.
Awesome.
I guess first, why don't we start with just why don't you introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah. So I'm Mary, obviously, and I have just completed my sophomore year at Augustana College in Rock Island. I'm studying psychology and Spanish with a theater minor. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that yet, to be honest. I'm figuring it out. But I'm very involved with the theater department at Augustana. I've done a show, at least one production every semester, or previously trimester. I'm Filipino American. I'm from the Chicago suburbs. My parents, they immigrated from the Philippines in 96, I believe. So we've been here for a while, pretty well established here.
All right, cool. I guess, I don't know, we'll start it off with just what's it like for you as far as trying to find roles for Asian Americans, in theater or film or anything?
Right. So, I haven't really had that much experience out of school and community theaters, but actually for 4,000 Miles, which is a show I did at Playcrafters in Moline, it was my first community theater show. And that's how we met, or how we
Kind of met.
Kind of met, worked alongside each other without really knowing it. I had heard about this small theater company and how they were looking for an Asian actress, and they were really, really needing it. I saw the ad on Facebook and it said Chinese American. And I thought, okay, well, I'm a little Chinese. I got a little Chinese on my grandma's side, she's half, but I am through and through Filipino. But I just kind of considered it and thought, well, if that's what's available, I feel like sometimes I just fit the type.
Well, Mary, I have a question actually. So what made you want to get into theater or acting?
I feel like it was a while ago. It was definitely in junior high was when I first started acting, doing theater. But before that, I guess I had just had an interest from growing up on Disney and things like that, learning a little bit about Broadway as I started to grow up. I hadn't really considered it. I always thought that my first dream job as a kid was to be a singer, which is very interesting now because I don't really sing much. I have a choir scholarship at Augustana, so that keeps me singing, but I am definitely more focused on the theater realm. I'm going for a theater minor. I'm much more involved in the theater department rather than the music department. But I guess I'd always been leaning towards the arts as a kid. I always really found a big interest in movies and TV, theater, music.
As an Asian American actress, specifically Filipino, did you have anyone or an actress that you looked up to or that you watched as you grew up?
The unfortunate thing about that is there aren't that many that are visible here in the United States at all. So I feel like the default for a lot of people is Lea Salonga, and she's incredibly talented. But I wish that she just wasn't the only one. I also like Ava Noblezada, who has kind of popped up recently when she was in the revival of Miss Saigon. But it's interesting because both of those stories are not Filipino exactly. So it's hard to think of any particular Filipino examples other than maybe people from cheesy Filipino dramas on TV.
ABS-CBN.
ABS-CBN, which is being censored right now by the president of the Philippines. But that's a whole nother story.
Really?
That is entirely, oh man, yeah.
But yeah, I do wish there were more Filipinos in particular that I could look up to. I feel like just like with 4,000 Miles, when I auditioned for this part that was Chinese American, I just feel like it's easy for me to settle for being lumped into the category of like Asian, because that's all we can really afford to do.
So that's actually an interesting question. We talked about this in the last episode, and I talked about it. Because we're Filipino, there's almost this dissonance of like, am I considered Asian? Like, I grew up most of my life thinking, okay, yeah, I claim Asian, that's all I know. And then as more people in my life would be like, well, that's not really Asian, there's that kind of self-doubt, like, am I not? And you start to wonder, you start to look into your communities or that. So has that affected your personal life?
I mean, I remember growing up and having comments like that asking whether I'm actually Asian. I grew up in a very white suburb in the Chicago area, and I feel like there was always some confusion there. I think that, I have become more and more pleasantly surprised at how many Filipino Americans there are in the United States. Specifically, I looked it up, and apparently Tagalog, which is the national language of the Philippines, is the fourth most spoken language in the United States.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of do fit into a very different category than other East Asian communities like Korean, Chinese, Japanese. Those stick out to be very different because the Philippines in particular was very marked by colonialism. So we can't really identify with those cultures. There was definitely Chinese influence, but we're in essence like a tribal kind of people, very, very indigenous kind of identity that's been slowly kind of chipped away, but also being reclaimed right now, I feel like. So I think that I do struggle with that idea of being like, oh, you're just, the Asian girl. But I try to specify and be like, I'm Filipino, this is my community, this is who I am, this is where my family came from, this is where my parents are from. I've spent a couple summers living there. So
that's awesome.
I would like to strongly advocate for the Filipino community because I feel like we're very forgotten.
I think Filipino too. I think that verge of that Asian race, Pacific Islander, Filipino. I think the reason there's a lot of question is because I also had a really good a friend of mine who was Filipino for a long time, and I didn't know it. I thought he was Hispanic. Because he looked more, he had more Hispanic features than he did Filipino. And then when I went over to his house one time, his mom made chicken adobo, and I was like, whoa, dude, your mom makes chicken adobo? Like, I love adobo. And he's like, well, yeah, we are Filipino. And I was like, oh, dude, I thought you were like Hispanic or something, I took all these, and I think that's also too, is you got part of, some Filipinos look more Hispanic and some look more of the Asian side. And I think that's kind of the difference because Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese, we kind of, unless you
have their own identity, very strict.
We know, and they know what we look like. We look Asian to people. We look Asian as opposed to are they Filipino, are they Hispanic? And, you don't really know. So, and also the colonialism, I think, with the, it was French, wasn't it?
It was Spanish. So
okay.
That's hence my Spanish last name. If I trace back my ancestors far enough, I'm sure there's some Spanish blood in there.
If you look at Korea, Japan, China, K-pop is popular everywhere in the world now. Everyone loves K-pop and K-drama and Korean food and everything. But, they're still very much Asian, is what I think what a typical American thinks of what Asian is. I think they think of what Korea would be, what China would be, what Japan would be, wearing kimonos and bowing and all that kind of stuff like that. Where I think Filipino is very, or at least what people think of the Philippines is, it's more progressive. Maybe not as many traditions as what they would consider to be traditional Asian. So
yeah, it's unfortunate because it wasn't very much under our control. Because even when the United States had freed or given the Filipinos their independence from Spain, they ended up staying there until the 40s, late 40s, which is really not talked about all the time as a territory, how they were forcing them to speak Spanish in schools to English. So my whole family, they grew up teaching or speaking English to each other. So it's interesting to see how that progression has changed, but I think now a lot of historians in the Philippines are searching for ways to reconnect to our past, which has been taken over by culture over culture over culture, and kind of establishing that identity between ourselves. But I do feel like there is a distinction, like you said, between those traditional like East Asians versus like what it means to be Filipino. So it's just hard because I don't think I've ever encountered a role that says this is for a Filipino person. I feel like it's Chinese is usually Chinese or other, I don't know, it's largely Chinese. There's a lot of Chinese visibility in the United States, but also it's like, I'm not Chinese, I was cast for this part because I fit in this large category of Asian.
Of what you look like as opposed to what you are.
Sometimes I really feel like Chinese is just a be-all blanket word that they use.
Yeah.
This kind of look versus an actual looking for someone that was actually Chinese.
It absolutely is. It's the history of this country. It's the otherization of people that don't look like the majority of the time. Like it's a symptom of that. Do you think grappling with that identity, do you think that in part drives your, I guess, desire to be representative of our culture? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I have had struggles in the sense where growing up, I would always be cast in roles that were like Asian very broadly. Like my first part was at the end of junior high. My first named part was being Princess Jasmine, which is also not like a Filipino role at all. It's well, Aladdin's like kind of a whole another weird realm of like Disney taking something and making it something else instead of actually embracing the Arabic traditions it came from. But I feel like I've identified with being Filipino very strongly now and not trying to hide it or not trying to feel ashamed of it anymore. It's just hard because with some productions, it's like at Augustana is a very white majority school, and I think I'm one of the only Filipinos involved in the theater department. So, for example, a show that I did in the fall was She Kills Monsters, and I was really hoping to be as one of the main two characters, and I feel like one of the things that held the director back was that if it's sisters, can they look different? Can one be white? Can one be Asian? Like, I feel like that's something that people can question, or like, it's like when people jump on stage, it's like, and it's an Asian person speaking, they expect it to be, oh, this is an Asian character.
Do you ever get asked to do like an accent? Is that like common for you?
No, not in particular. I feel like I haven't had that experience, luckily, which is good because like I'm born in the Chicago suburbs. My parents have lived in Chicago for the past like 25 years. I can't really identify with the Filipino accent or Chinese accent or anything. I just feel like I got a little bit of Chicago accent going on.
I think that's a good question because I think as an Asian male, and I don't know about Emil or even Phil, but as an Asian male, I've been asked several times to do an accent, Asian accent. And it's like, is it because of society looks at Asian men kind of like we have to have that accent to make us more authentic, and Asian women don't because they're hypersexualized, and to get the audience to like them and to kind of do that, like if they speak perfect English, then it, you know, I that's always been a question for me too, because I know a lot of Asian actresses who also said like, oh, I've never been asked to do an accent. I'm like, I've done almost every audition I've done it. Oh, they got to be like broken English, you know, and so like, you know, and then also too, then you go in and you do an Asian accent, and they're like, no, we don't want like Chinese Asian accent, like we want Korean, like fresh off the boat, like accent, like very slow and then deeper, and you know, more the deeper voice. And so it's for me, I was like, you know, it's fascinating that women, I guess Asian women aren't asked to do that as much. And I'm trying to think of roles that I see with an Asian female character, and how many of them do they actually not like speak broken English, and how many male characters I see on film and television that have the broken English, and I think if I'm correct, I think more men probably have the accent than women do, but I don't know.
I feel like there's definitely some things going on over gender lines. I also think there's this weird thing that's across like all the genders that Asian accents are funny. It's funny to not speak perfect English or to be this comedic, unintelligent stereotype. I feel like that's such a negative. Reinforcing such negative feelings towards a community if you don't speak English very properly, that I wish would back off. I mean, I think it's very good to normalize the use of accents, because so many immigrants have accents and their English is just as intelligent and is just as valid, obviously, as native speakers' English. But I feel like so many comedians, especially I think of like Ken Jeong, use their accents as a form of comedy. I'd be like, haha, look at me, I'm different, I'm dumber than you in a way, and I wish that it wasn't weaponized in that way.
Well, I think the American accent's like that too, because I always say I see more British actors doing an American accent that I come here, because then I'll see him in an interview and go, whoa, he's British, like what the heck? Then American actors going over and doing like a British accent, so I don't know if that's like also too like an American thing too. It's like, if you have an American accent, people will relate to you more than British. I like the British accent, but I mean, that's just the way it is. So, but I don't know if you guys have any more questions for us. If not, I have one more, just talking very quickly and then going on. But if you guys have any, you guys can go ahead.
Well, I did have a point to make. I'd also say that weaponizing that accent and having it be less severe of an offense, that's also a symptom of that, the whole model minority. Like, oh, they're so good in all other ways, we need to, this is fine, you can make fun of them a bit, but that stacks up over time. The question that I had is, you're the intersection of two minority viewpoints, as a woman and as a person of color. Which do you find more bias affecting you?
I definitely feel like it is the Asian part that can cause like more negative bias, because I feel like there are plenty of roles available in theater for women, but specifically finding parts for Asian women that aren't stereotyped, that aren't like, oh, you're explicitly Asian, or just feeling like you have to be cast in specifically Asian roles. That's something I really like hope to break out of by auditioning more for different roles, without having there be a question being like, why is she Asian?
Yeah. I
don't think that should be a question, because I was born in the United States. I'm an American person. I don't have citizenship in the Philippines. I'm American. And I just wish I could be cast in those stereotypical roles almost, where it's like the American teenager, because that's what I feel like I am. I don't think that there has to be necessarily limits or boxes for people. Well, obviously, I feel like Asian characters should be portrayed by other Asian people, but in terms of just like a general stock character,
there shouldn't be that restriction.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I just thought of a specific part that I really enjoyed seeing. I saw a production of Othello at this Shakespeare theater company in Chicago, and she was played. They rewrote Iago to be a lesbian Asian woman, and I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Just not tying a character to a gender or a nationality, just letting them be the villain and having the characteristics of this character without tying it to anyone. I think that's the beauty. That's the kind of things that I would like to break into, just parts in which it's just a character. It's not like my identity doesn't hold me back or like define this whole character. It's just kind of like it's there.
My identity isn't an obstacle. I get that.
Yeah.
I think Hamilton did that, the play, because they do.
Right.
where they cast, George Washington is played by an African American, and Hamilton.
Colorblind casting.
Which was awesome. And I know, like, I had a friend that was like, dude, this is so weird for me because they're supposed to be, and it's like, well, guess what? I've had to do with it my whole life, like try to relate to a white character. So now you can relate to someone that's a colored character. Like it works, So it's like we're people. It shouldn't really matter, I think as long as you portrayed who that character is and what they stood for, I don't think it really should matter. I mean, unless it's specifically like Asian roles specifically being played for Asian characters, yes, but for that type of thing, it's weird, yes, but I think I liked it. I was glad that they did that, and
right.
Hopefully those kinds of things continue to move on. That you can have an Asian person can have an American name, like Detective Saunders. I mean, that could be an Asian person, not Detective Chang, or something like that. So it's just like I like those.
Name thing's always hilarious for me.
Yeah.
So many of them are just like so stereotypically racist.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my name is Phil Couture. It is like the Frenchest name ever. And it just, like, I never get, like, there's never an Asian character on any show that doesn't have an Asian name. It's crazy.
Yeah, rarely. Very rarely.
The first one I saw was Lana Condor's in To All the Boys I Ever Loved.
Mm-hmm.
And she was specifically playing an Asian adopted. Her father is white, so she's playing and she's adopted herself from Vietnam, so she was playing that role. So that was like the first time I'd ever seen like an Asian character with like an American, like a white name, first and last name, so that was different for me. So
right, yeah, that movie in particular was very interesting for me when it came out, because like I said, she's just kind of an American teenager, and I think her mom is mentioned in the movie. I forgot what her background is exactly, like which country, but when it came out, I had some people saying, you look just like this girl. And I'm like, we're not of the same ethnic background at all, but just because we are young Asian American women, we are put into this category together.
That's all it takes.
That's all it takes. It's all it takes. But going back, I look up to Lin-Manuel Miranda a lot. I really like what he's done in the way he casted Hamilton, and how it really was something revolutionary and mainstream that the Broadway world needed to see to help encourage people and say, hey, this works. This is a cool thing we can all do now. That someone is actively encouraging to cast people who fit the character, and not just because history has erased people of color so much from the books. So maybe George Washington could have been an African American. Maybe any of these characters could have been an Asian. The Founding Fathers could have been a mix of people, but instead, the voices of people of color have been oppressed over generations. So I just really admire him in acknowledging that there should be a space and a voice for what America looks like now, and not just how America was written to be in books hundreds of years ago.
Huh. I like that.
Yeah, that's good. So we're almost done here. So Mary, I wanted to ask you, if you could meet a younger version of Mary and give her anything, like any kind of advice, what would you give her?
Ooh, this one became really relevant because I've been doing a lot of reflecting on my hometown as I've had to be home. I think that I would tell myself to never feel bad about being different, for being Filipino, and instead of hiding that identity, because back when I was growing up, I always wished that I was like this blonde American girl, which is such a sad and common feeling, because there is this aspect of otherness and the alienation of people that don't fit into the community. Tell myself every single opportunity that I have to just be proud of who you are, and encourage others to be completely who they are. And if they disagree, or if they don't think that you're worthy enough, then they're not worth your time. Just fully embrace your identity and be proud of it, because there's no reason to be ashamed of it. It's only the fault of the oppressors that has caused you to feel ashamed of your identity.
Awesome. So I have no more questions unless you guys do.
Phil, I know you had a few.
No, I mean I've got tons, but I don't know how much. What are we looking like time wise?
We're at about
9.5 minutes.
Yeah, we have about 9.5 minutes, man.
Let's go with just try and get one more quick question in. Do you feel sometimes, like, I've been thinking about this one a lot, and I just wonder everyone else's kind of perspective on it. Like, I feel like the African American community and the Hispanic community and stuff like that, they seem to have much louder voices about their representation in film and media. And I don't know, like, is it just me that's kind of feeling like we're just as misrepresented as they are, but we just don't have that voice out there saying, hey, what's going on, as much as they do? Does anybody else kind of feel that way?
Yeah, I can definitely feel that sometimes. I feel like it's something that's been trying to be remedied. I specifically think of To All the Boys I Loved Before and Crazy Rich Asians, but even those representations are not always like perfect. Specifically, I think about how in Crazy Rich Asians, a lot of the Filipino characters or the brown Asians were kind of the servant or side character types rather than at the front of the picture. But I do feel like we have that problem of kind of not advocating for ourselves as much. I feel like it's because Asians can often fit into the model minority in a weird way. I think in general, Asians have kind of, I kind of just lost what I was saying, but were you going to say something, Emil?
Oh, I would actually say we do benefit a lot from that whole model minority thing. So when people not of our community see that, and then we choose to be loud about issues that affect us, they're so often discredited because of those benefits, right? They find ways to minimize and make those issues less valid because we are benefiting in ways that
other minorities are not. Yeah.
And I'm sure there are studies and whole ways you could look about that may argue the extent of that.
Yeah.
But that's what I think is the issue.
I think that some of the stereotypes of not Filipinos, but Asians in general can be. Sorry about that. I feel like some of the stereotypes. I remember having a conversation with someone growing up at some point where they're like, "Well, your stereotype is that you're smart, so I don't know why you're complaining." And
that itself is a microaggression.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so
minimizing our
frustrating.
struggles. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Like, I feel like other cultures a lot of times don't feel like our struggle is just as valid as theirs.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Like, all right, I grew up my whole life trying to live up to expectations that I wasn't even sure where a concrete boundary was. Imagine being a kid that whole time, and it's terrible in any extreme. Whether people don't expect anything of you, or people expect more than you are capable of, and have the tools to get as good as they think you can be. Like, those are not any less valid because of that.
I think too, also I think there's a lot less of us in the entertainment industry because of the Asian culture. A lot of us go to Ivy League schools, go to become doctors or dentists or nurse. And, we're told going to be in entertainment, like, you're not going to make it. That's bad.
Yeah.
And I
That
think
is a good point.
there's less of us. I think there's less of us that go into entertainment. So then when there is entertainment roles and they're like, oh, we need, there are Asian actors out there and actresses, but I think the roles also, I remember it was an Asian actor said, if we want more roles, we need more Asian writers to write those roles, because the problem is we have so many white or African American or Hispanic writers that are writing those roles for their races, and they're saying, well, if we can't get those roles, then we'll write them ourselves. Well, then it's like, well, where are the Asian writers? Where are we at to write our stuff and put characters in there that we want, that don't have accents, that are just regular Americans, and there's not as many of us, you know. If you look at the Asian directors in America, if you look even in sports too, like how many Asian Americans do you see in the NFL? In the NFL, the NBA, NHL, you know, baseball, you see a lot of like from another country coming over, but how many do you see? You don't really see any that become really famous, you know, and you see, you know, the Peyton Mannings and the Tom Bradys and all of them, you know, that are recognizable. So I think there's less of us, and I think across the board in entertainment, there's less of us. Now you get into the tech field or you get into other fields, there's more of us, you know. So it's just, I don't know. I wish that was different, but I think that's also probably a reason too.
It's a vicious cycle, man. If for us to have more representation, more of us have to choose to
Exactly.
go here. But for us to choose, we have to break away from more traditional cultures. Like,
Yeah. So,
what do you do?
yeah.
Well,
Sure.
did we lose?
I think we lost her.
Did we lose somebody?
Mary, come back.
Oh, she said she lost Wi-Fi.
Oh,
Oh, there she is.
welcome back.
That was a big Wi-Fi issue. We're really living in the time of the coronavirus, aren't we?
That's all good.
So we don't have much time, so I just want to say thank you to you, Mary, for joining us, and hopefully we can get you back on again, maybe, and talk a little bit more, and a little bit more of some more projects you're doing and everything else. But we appreciate you coming on. I always like to have like kind of more of a female perspective on things too, because we're just three Asian guys that like say, you know, this is what happens to us, but women might experience different. So I'm very happy, and I say thank you, and hopefully you can join us again.
Awesome.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you very much. I feel like we just kind of touched the surface here. There's so many
Sure.
other things that we could talk about, like the examples of ScarJo and Ghost in the Shell and things like that. And
Oh, it's so good.
I know.
We'll have a special episode. Maybe we can have several guests for that, and we can have several Asian Americans, and we can just talk about representation and whitewashing
ScarJo
and
episode.
yeah, Asian appropriation and everything. So, but thank you again, and we'll stay in touch, and I may have you do like a small intro or something that we can post on Instagram or something like that. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
thank you.
Thanks for
And
coming.
to everyone else, thank you guys.